Trigger warning. This narrative contains depictions of self-harm, violent disappearance, and traumatic injuries. The events are dramatized and fictionalized for the purpose of this story. If you or someone you know is struggling with thoughts of self-harm, please seek immediate help. Resources and helplines are listed in the video description. I arrived at the ranger station just after dawn. The thermometer on the dashboard read -18. My breath came out in blunt, white puffs that skittered across the windshield and died on the glass. The road had been cleared enough for my truck to get to the gate, but everything else beyond the gravel was a white wall. Trees that had become thin, black silhouettes against the sky. The station sat pressed into that wall like a secret, low and brick and stubborn. A weld of heat and coffee and the thin smell of old rubber from boots that hadn't been dry for long. Chief Lawrence met me at the door. He had the kind of face that looked like it had been hammered by weather and decisions. Deep-set lines, jaw worked hard by years of saying no in the right moments. He didn't shake my hand in the usual way. He checked my coat, my boots, then regarded me as if confirming the fit. "Don Collins," I said, and the name landed like it always does when you hand it over to a new post. "You made the run?" he asked. It wasn't a question about distance. It was about whether I had the patience to show up in weather that likes to keep things lost. "I made it," I said. "What now?" He led me inside by the hip and laid out 3 things without much ceremony. A thermos of coffee that was exactly how coffee should be at a ranger station. Hot enough to cut frost from your hands, but not so hot it burned. A page stapled to a clipboard with my assignment for the week, and a thin laminated card the size of a business card. Glossy and plain, corners rounded by a dozen fingers. He didn't hand the card to me. He put it on the table, face up, as if it had to be invited to leave the station. On the wall behind him there was a rectangular patch of frames and pins and Polaroids that shouldn't have been together. Photos of boots in mud. Photos of empty tents. A child's shoe half swallowed by leaves. Faces turned to the camera in better weather. Grinned faces, stiff ranger smiles, at least one birthday cake shot with a candle blurred by movement. Small captions beneath some of them. Oliver Hayes, 2012. Brian Romero, 2016. Jennifer Rodriguez, 2018. A thin metal plate at the center read, in a hand someone had tried to keep small and professional, "Station roster, missing in service." You learn fast in this line of work that some walls are maps. This one mapped absences. The laminated card, Lawrence told me, was how you navigated what wasn't mapped. Protocol reduced to a handful of imperatives that fit in a pocket. He tapped the card like it was a fiddle string. He read to me, low and deliberate, as if reading aloud to a trainee, and because I'd come to learn the language, I absorbed it. "This is the card," he said. 4 rules and a dozen years of decisions behind them. You read it once, you read it twice, you do as it says. If you want my job, you follow it. If you don't, you sign the transfer. He slid a photocopied envelope across the table. It contained a memo short. Probationary period, psychological screening, and a note from the county that said their office would prefer that new hires be permitted to return home each night. It was a suggestion they never meant. The card sat between us. I read aloud because the act of the voice seemed to make the words more legitimate. I say the card's words now because that card is what I was given the day I learned the cadence of the forest and the cost that comes with listening. The laminated card, original station card, Lawrence told me, and repeated to every new hire, reads, 1. If the compass spins, run to the station by the fastest route. 2. Count the boots at every stop. If the count changes, sound the alarm and do not search alone. 3. If you hear children laughing in the trees, follow the extraction protocol without delay. 4. Between 01 and 04, maintain position. Do not move unless ordered. Those 4 lines sat small on the card. Lawrence watched me watch them as if the look could tell him what I would do on some night when the trees decided to be more than wood. I had a skeptical patience then. These weren't the first rules I'd been given in the field. There had been others in other stations, never the same, always similar. But the wall didn't lie.
For every rule, there was a photograph, or a missing pair of boots, or a coroner's note cataloged in dry, bureaucratic language. The rules were not heroic. They were survival statements shaped by repetition and loss. Those were the originals, Lawrence said, filling a silence the way some people fill a cup with more coffee. We've added 3 more over the years. Station policy. You can call them updates. The forest is good at making new problems. We had to get better at how we respond. He slid another sheet toward me, an unofficial memo with 3 added lines stamped Station Directive, effective immediately. He didn't pretend it was anything but an enshrined admission that the original card, while tidy, wasn't enough. 5. Radios must be carried and monitored at all times. 1 missed ping is cause for protocol. 6. Do not touch or disturb anomalous objects. Report, bag, and tag, then withdraw. 7. No solo patrols during curfew hours unless under express command. He read them slow, as if reading the length of someone else's sentence might let them linger less in his head. I read them back to him, the laminated cards 4 and the new 3, all 7 together in my mouth like prayer. The card was a talisman. The additions were coping. Lawrence gave me my first order. Walk the marked trail from the lookout to the creek. Pair with Romero. Report in on the hour. Brian Romero was a 2x4 of a man with a grin he didn't try to make pretty. He had been a seasonal who slipped into permanence because he liked the light at dawn and the way the stars came in thick in summer. He knew the terrain the way a piano player knows the inside of a piece. We strapped on packs, checked a compass as a matter of course, and left the station for the kind of routine patrol that is designed to be forgettable. I repeated the card's first rule aloud like a liturgy, partly mock, partly habit. If the compass spins, run, I said. Romero laughed, the kind of laugh that assumes a thing is absurd because it hasn't happened yet. My compass never spins, he said. He had a confidence you'd keep if you were young and felt like the world still owed you your share of grace. We took the trail and lived in small things. The clack of a boot on a boardwalk, the ping of a distant bird, the way the sun painted the snow in sudden gold. We marked our boots with a chalk tally where the standard demanded it. 3 strokes, then 2, then the X for lunch. At each stop, we counted like a ritual. One of the added rules had been drilled into me that morning. Count the boots. It's a practice with the character of a superstition until you know the number matters in hard ways. At 11:12, on a flat stretch near a dead cedar that leaned like a tired sentinel, Romero's compass jerked. It wasn't a gradual spin, it snapped like a lid off a jar and kept spinning until it blurred. His eyebrow rose and he held the compass level, then looked at me. If you'd seen it in a training manual, you'd think it a glitch. We both knew better. Run it back, I said, the words stripped of their theatrics. We broke into a trot that felt ridiculous and small against the knowledge we'd been given. We moved fast. We made the station in less than 20 minutes. We found Romero's boots by the cedar 3 days later. The boots were arranged as if someone had taken them off carefully and set them down to rest. Laces tidy, tongues tucked. Nothing else around them but a ring of crushed grasses and a small footprint set apart, tiny and deliberate. The ranger who filed the first report under "Boots Found, Return to Base" added a line that read, in the bureaucratic voice they used to study themselves, "No other sign of a person." There is a certain tilt to any report you read. There's the official voice and the private knowledge underneath. The knowledge that pairs are gone, and there's a ceremony of silence afterward. The wall gained a new square photo. Brian Romero. Empty boots. No smiling face, just a pair of boots in an October afternoon, too clean for what they meant. I held the photograph in my hand in the back room the night after the boots were logged. The card in my pocket seemed too small to hold the weight of what we had to do. But that small bit of laminated plastic had 4 lines that the department had chosen to make portable and binding. We say them like a liturgy, not because they are magical, but because they are all we have when the world refuses to be logical.
We began to compile evidence: radio recordings, photographs, coroner reports that used strict antiseptic language, post-mortem findings indicate, and left an air around them that felt like a sealed box. There were days when the work was taxonomy, and there were nights when those boxes came undone. Radio transcript: 11:13, Field Unit, Romero, Collins, Trail 4 near Cedar Bend. 11:06, Collins to base. Base, this is Collins. We're at Cedar Bend, compass acting odd. 11:07, Romero, it spun. It... Static. Then a high, brief sound. 11:08, Collins, Romero? Static. 11:09, Collins to base. Base, Romero's gone. Boots here, no sign. Requesting. Static. Signal lost. The transcript held a static that didn't just mean interference. Static is the absence where a person once transmitted their voice. We taped the transcript in the file under 4A. The file smelt faintly of old coffee and the salt of long nights. We had to keep making rules because the forest keeps inventing ways to test the limit of human curiosity. Someone will inevitably look. Someone will inevitably move closer to the noise. Training at that station was 2 parts practical and 1 part social pressure. We taught recruits to keep their compasses level with a shallow, mechanical intimacy. We taught them to mark boots and to count them until their fingers nodded along to the motion. We taught them to check radios, 1 beep, then 2, and to hold their voices flat on the line. We also taught, in a different register, how to decide whether to obey. There is a point where training stops and you just do what the laminated card tells you because you have seen enough absences to make your choice for you. Obedience becomes an act of care. At the first formal training class I took, Lawrence made us stand up and repeat the card twice. He wanted us to make the words work inside us until they were mechanical. He wanted them to be the first thing that rose when the trees began to speak in their strange, impossible ways. We quoted the 4 lines out loud, and then the 3 station directives. The card lies small on a recruit's palm. The words have the feel of a coin you rub with your thumb when you think too much. After the first block of teaching, there is always a soft pause, a place to breathe and decide. So here's the one ask. If you want the full case documents and images referenced in this episode, check the pinned link in the description. It's the only early CTA you'll get from me. We keep the files where the forest can't touch them. The station builds routine like a machine builds parts. It replaces the missing pieces with rituals.
There is the grabber tool, a pole with a pincer that lets you bring something to the periphery without entering its immediate gravity. There is the chalk for boots, the camera for cataloging absence, the red evidence bags for whatever you must remove. The pockets of a ranger's coat begin to know where every tool lives. Habit becomes armor. Early on, there was an incident involving Jennifer Rodriguez. She was newish, sharp, quick with a joke that always landed somewhere near grief. She liked coffee black and maps with their edges taped. She had been issued the card on a bright autumn morning and read it like a puzzle, cocking her head at the way the words wanted to be literal or not. On a late shift, she called in a radio check, and then, something that unsettled even the station, started to laugh. It was small at first, a ripple in the static. Then it became a child's high bell laugh threaded with something older and more practiced than mirth. The radio carried it as if a playground had been tucked into the crook of the pines. We did what we had been taught. We moved toward the sound with the caution of people who do not want to be the next photo on the wall. We called out her name. We didn't approach the clear center of the sound. We kept our distance and repeated the card's mantra, because that's what a training manual says when the world refuses to make coherent noises. By the time we reached the edge of the clearing, the laughter had stopped. All that remained was the radio, warm in a pile of leaves, the receiver looping a last phrase. Can't and then the static swallowed the words whole. The radio's red LED blinked as if it had been waiting for attention. We took the radio back. Jennifer's footprints were there, leading in, then a gravel of leaves where the prints stopped abruptly. Her radio was on the evidence list. We did not find her. Later, when the coroner's note arrived, it used a language meant to keep people from panicking. No trauma compatible with predation, it read, but then the pages had margins where someone had drawn a small, lonely cross. The page was redacted in places, names and details excised. The photograph taped to the report showed a radio, one of our radios, scuffed and damp, with laugh lines engraved in a place where laughter doesn't leave marks. The third rule, if you hear children laughing in the trees, follow the extraction protocol without delay, is the one they say less because it implies an option no reasonable civilian would countenance. The rule, as written on the card, is tidy and sterile. In practice, it meant the extraction protocol could include measures that are not for the public record. We had an internal policy memo that spelled out the extraction protocol in a language so flat it seemed to try to disguise the moral cost. That memo was redacted in parts. I have read the unredacted lines once. They are a hard thing to know. When I speak of the extraction now, I do so carefully. I will not describe procedure. I will not be the man who gives instructions for harm. I will say only what I have to. The extraction protocol was designed as a last resort. It was not a heroic thing. It was a method to prevent further loss. It predated me, and it has outlived people I grew to like. There is a moment in the training when a recruit asks the wrong question. They will ask out of curiosity, or arrogance, or a lack of the small fear that keeps you alive. I have heard it in a dozen voices over the years. Variants on, "Do you really do that? Could that save me?" We answer with the card. We answer with a sigh. We answer with the story of Brian Romero's boots and Jennifer's radio. There is another thing I learned. The forest likes tests. They follow patterns. A compass that spins is never an incidental event. A child's laugh will not be alone in the clean sense of a sound. It is usually followed by other signatures. Movement where there should be none. Objects misplaced like someone practiced a joke on physics. Compasses misbehaving, radios glitching. The phenomena arrive as a suite, and once you've seen enough suites, you stop asking why and begin learning which response keeps your team breathing. We began to keep a folder of case files. Each file held a single photograph and a transcript and a line in an index. They had names. Files give absences weight. They allow you to see repetition without being overwhelmed by novelty. File 7A, Brian Romero, Trail 4, Empty Boots. Photograph, pair of ranger boots, tongues tucked, laces tied, arranged on a ring of flattened glass. Transcript, Collins, he's not here. Bass, read your instruments. Collins, there's nothing else. Bass, tag it and log. Do not, redacted. Coroner, no bodily remains recovered. No predatory signs. File 9C, Jennifer Rodriguez, radio recovery. Photograph, handheld radio, mud-streaked, display cracked. Transcript, partial, static, faint laughing, can't, then silence. Notes, last known visual contact 0042. Entry trail ends. We cataloged each occurrence to see the forest's grammar. The patterns are hollowing. An object left neatly, instruments that fail in the same way, laughter, with a child's cadence as if someone who knows the shape of our fear has learned to use it. You put these together like a jigsaw, and it doesn't make a picture, but the edges begin to look familiar. At the station, new rules were not invented out of whim. They were written after bad things happened and someone in authority decided to find a way to minimize recurrence. The 3 station directives were the kind of bureaucratic response that misreads grief as logistics. Radios on, no touching, pair up. The directives were bland, but their blandness hid the fact that someone had been forced to make a choice between 2 impossible things.
There is a particular kind of fatigue that sets in when you watch colleagues vanish.
It's a boredom not from repetition, but from the constant low-level adrenaline of knowing the world might present you with a test and that failure often smells like a missing pair of boots. You become ritualized. The card moves with you. You find yourself repeating the lines aloud when you check your compass, not to grandstand, but because it makes the world more predictable. Predictability in that setting is oxygen. I was not exempt from ritual. The scar on my palm came from a drill in a winter months ago. Nothing dramatic, just a fast, nervous motion with a tool that slipped. The scar is a map of a moment when my attention failed and I paid for it. The more dramatic marks, those I keep inside the file under a code name. It is easier to maintain composure if you don't rehearse the details in public. A lot of the station's story is performed in small humiliations. We tape red evidence bags on the inside of cupboard doors. We leave chalk marks on the floor where footprints must be compared. We make the ridiculous into the acceptable because ridiculosity has a way of fatiguing neurosis into compliance. The forest doesn't stop because you've reduced the bizarre into a practice. It merely invents new tests. There are recruits who won't bend to the ritual at first. They mock, they poke, they ask to take the risk because they think risk has a narrative that ends with them alive and lauded. Most don't last. Some of them cheat their way into worse endings because stubbornness is harder to manage than compliance. There is a file for each of them, a photo or a redacted note. We do not dramatize their choices. We keep them as evidence. One night, months after Romero and Rodriguez, we had a summer unit come through. Seasonals who thought they would camp and drink black coffee and tell story after story around a lantern. One of them, a kid with too many tattoos and a grin like a dare, went out by himself to check the stars. He wasn't on shift. He wasn't supposed to be out there alone. The next morning, we found a circle of prints in the grass around his tent. Many impressions, perfect as if a dozen people had been there, all aiming inward. In the center of that circle, nothing but a little clean spot of bare earth, and the flap of his tent swung like a hand. I have learned to respect the things the forest refuses to explain. There is dignity in doing everything you can to prepare for the unexplainable. There is also a cost. The cost shows in small places. A fox that comes to the door and refuses to be chased away. The man at the end of the table who stops smiling when the subject comes up. The recruits who press their palms flat on the laminated card as if feeling its texture will tether them. After Romero's boots and after Jennifer's radio, the station voted, if a station can vote, to add 3 directives that were meant to close gaps around the original card.
They were pragmatic. Keep your radio, don't touch anomalous artifacts, never patrol alone at night. We rehearsed them and laminated them and put them in the file and taught them to recruits. We said them out loud, and then, in private, we circulated the memos with the redactions and the notes about unfortunate but necessary actions. Nobody liked the way the memos read in private. The memos have clinical language that tries to flatten moral fury into administrative necessity. The redacted lines show where someone, somewhere, decided that certain knowledge had to be limited. Access to full protocol restricted to senior officers, one line read. Implementation of extraction measures authorized on a case-by-case basis. There are words there meant to be blunt and impersonal. Their bluntness is a poor cover for what those measures required. Medical checks are routine at the station. Dr. Ruby Patterson came through twice a year. She was efficient and the only person I ever saw look at the wall and not avert her eyes. She'd examine your hands and the line across your palm that a past moment had left, and then she'd ask, politely and clinically, "You alive?" It is a ridiculous question to ask an adult who had just navigated a day in the woods. The joke is that if you answer yes, they sign off. If you answer no, they sit and listen. For the record, Dr. Patterson once asked me, in the privacy of an exam room, whether the station's ritualized policies were ethically defensible. Her question was professional. She wanted to know from a medical view whether the station's measures protected life. I answered with the card. I told her we did what we had to, and she wrote in her file, "History of trauma exposure, counseling recommended." She was right. We all needed it. The forest also plays with the small things that make you certain. Compasses spin and spin until you run. Things move just enough to catch your eye. An axe leaning in one place when you know it was stacked in another. People report hearing whispered names that sound like their own in a language they do not speak. The sum of these small tests builds dread like a muscle. You learn to flex by obeying. There was a man named Gardner. He'd been a mechanical type, hands that liked to assemble engines into something with purpose. He disappeared in a way that left oddness stamped all over it. We found him with his skin stretched oddly, face made into a grin it had never known. The coroner's report was clinical and horrific in that steady way. Post-mortem presentation inconsistent with natural causes. We redacted the photograph in the file because even though the photograph itself was ugly, it had the effect of teaching the newcomers what it meant to flinch at the world. We read the card again in a training circle after Gardner. We read all 7 rules and let the words sit like stones on our tongues. In moments like that, the card is both shield and indictment.
It tells you how to survive, and also tells you that surviving will cost you. There are always losses, colleagues who become frames on a wall. You weigh them against the cost of learning to obey. Sometime after Gardner, I began to understand the way the station's decisions reproduced themselves. A new recruit would repeat the card because you primed them to, and then they'd become the person who enforced the card on the next group of incoming seasonal staff. Obedience begets obedience. Rules survive even when the original reasoning gets foggy. The card continues in pockets. It murmurs in the coat when you sleep, and in the glove when you reach for your compass. It is small, portable, and tyrannical in its simplicity. I have been required to follow Rule 3, in essence, more than once. Each time I have lived with the detail in my bones and not my mouth. The narratives we tell each other vary by who is present. Some tell it with the stone face of a man who has done necessary things. Others tell it with a quiet that tries to put the memory in a locked box. I will say only, there are measures we have on the ledger that are intended to draw a hard line between the living and the thing that wants to pull us into its grammar. These measures are not heroic, and they are not always clean. Their language is redacted, and their execution is a private burden. My hands still remember the speed of taking a radio out of a pocket and cradling it like a living thing. I remember nights when I'd sit by the window and think of the wall of photos as a map of the cost of curiosity. I remember convincing myself I could keep my skepticism intact by calling it ritual. I remember a young recruit asking me once, "What's the part where you stop caring?" I laughed, and then I was quiet because I had to think of the right answer. There are things that happen to you in the forest that are not offered up as stories so much as asides, and that become part of the weight you carry. Once, in late winter, we were on a night drive, and my headlights skittered over something. 2 boots on the ice, placed toe to toe as if someone had set them down and walked away. We took the boots back, cataloged them, and I saw that even in the small trivialities, the forest liked theater. Presentation mattered. It multiplies the bewilderment. The rules get quoted in different circumstances. Sometimes we frame them as instruction, sometimes we frame them as confession. The card's lines live in our mouths and in the training halls and in the folds of official memos. I will say them again, because repetition is a form of protection, and because the card is how I came to understand the rhythm of what the forest asks. 1. If the compass spins, run to the station by the fastest route. 2. Count the boots at every stop. If the count changes, sound the alarm and do not search alone. 3. If you hear children laughing in the trees, follow the extraction protocol without delay. 4. Between 01 and 04, maintain position. Do not move unless ordered. 5. Radios must be carried and monitored at all times. One missed ping is cause for protocol. 6. Do not touch or disturb anomalous objects. Report, bag, and tag, then withdraw. 7. No solo patrols during curfew hours unless under express command. Saying them again felt like grounding. Saying them a third time would feel like rote. The card is more than a list. It is the station's way of binding the new to the old, the newcomer's hands to the history of those who did not make it back. We moved forward because movement is what we do. The first blocks of days melded into routine, and routine is both a weapon and a comfort. I learned to sleep in fits. I learned to let the card be an object that I could touch when I woke up and feel the assurance of its small, plastic smoothness. At the end of my second week on shift, we were called out to a cabin not on any official map, a forgotten hut on the edge of a swamp the county line forgot to recognize. The call came over the radio as a whisper. A civilian reported lights at midnight and footsteps circling a cabin. We were hesitant because the report smelled like a prank. Then the call added a detail that unstitched the ordinary. The caller said they heard children's laughter on the wind, and the voice cracked in a way that told us it wasn't a scoff. The call had a number attached to it, file 14H, and so we moved. We took 2 trucks and a pair of flashlights. The snow was crusted and thin, and the trees threw long black hands at us as we walked. The walk to the cabin seemed longer than the map suggested. The night air had a way of stretching time when you don't want it to. I had the card in my pocket and the compass in my hand, because you learn to carry both, concrete things for an area of life that tends to be abstract. By the time we reached the little cabin, the moon was a smear behind cloud. Someone had nailed a child's drawing to the door, crayon suns and a crooked house, the kind of earnest thing you staple to the refrigerator and forget until something reminds you of living. The drawing flapped once in the wind as we ducked under the porch eave. Someone had used too much blue for the sky and scribbled stick figures with what might have been happy faces. It looked absurd and obscene on that cabin door, like a child's postcard nailed where it shouldn't be. We took our positions the way the card taught us to. 2 at the path, 2 on the far side, 1 keeping an eye on the tree line. The moon had thinned and gone. Headlights and torches drew everything inward like a magnifying glass. The laughter we'd been sent for had stopped, or maybe it had retracted like a tide. We called out names. The radios gave the usual static, not friendly, not informing. The compass in my hand was steady. For a ridiculous second, I almost believed the card had been right about some things being simple. Spin and run, count and log, maintain position.
Then a sound rose in the dark, a slow, methodical set of footsteps that circled the little cabin. They were heavier than a child's tread, and arranged with a kind of deliberate ceremony, like a person had rehearsed them to make a measure of noise. They moved in a circle, close to the foundation, then away, then close again, and every time they came back, my skin felt like it was being counted. We began the count because counting is something you can control when the forest refuses to be sensible. 1, 2, 3, 10, 20. At 32, I heard someone on my left whisper a name, my name, but not in any voice I recognized. It sounded like it had been practiced in another mouth. I pinched the brim of my cap and let the training do the rest. We did not step toward the sound. We kept our positions. We did not, despite every instinct that wanted to move and rescue and make the world reasonable again, cross the threshold. The footsteps kept coming, and, like an artillery of patience, they kept returning. At 40, the sound was a series of soft taps that made the earth feel newly intimate. At 47, the thing outside the door stopped, and there was, for a beat that stretched like rubber, an almost perfect silence where we expected a sound. In that silence, somebody laughed,
small and clear, and then the radio at the point guard's hip went dead in our hands. You remember small details in nights like that. The way the snow underfoot made a sound like tissue paper. The way your glove would sweat and then freeze again. The way someone said your name and it felt like a test. The protocol at that point is rigorous in a way that the public would find grotesque. You do not improvise. You do not make a heroism you cannot afford. You follow the plan because improvisation is what got people killed in historical files we taped to the cabinet. We waited until dawn. Dawn felt obscene, a betrayal of the night that had kept its reasons close. When the light came, we found a perfect ring of prints around the cabin. Dozens, not random, but arranged as if a dozen people had stood shoulder to shoulder and stared inward. In the center of that circle, there was one small indentation in the dirt, a depression the size of a child's fist. There was no body, there was no blood. There was a scarf, child-sized, blue, tied around a nail on the porch, drying in a sun that had no business being forgiving. We logged everything. The photographs printed into the file looked like any other set of evidence, except the caption read, "Cabin, perfect ring of prints, no human remains. Radio signal lost at 0413. I clipped the child's drawing to the back of the file, partly for record, partly because it made the whole business feel like a poor joke. We learned two things that week. One, the forest will not produce itself legibly if you insist on explanatory narratives. Two, the card is less instruction and more contract.
You carry it in your pocket, and its presence performs a promise. If you do what it says, you have leverage to keep living. If you don't, you may become the kind of silence that gets framed. In the months that followed the cabin, absence widened its canvas. The cases came in clusters, like storms that travel the same latitude. Summer, that warm flirting season where seasonals pressed their luck against the trees, was particularly cruel. A red pickup truck rolled into a ditch on a back access road. We pulled it out and found a picnic spread left, as if someone had gone to fetch more food and never returned. A pocket knife lay open on the hood, polished and unthreatening. The boots were gone. There was a trend we could not ignore. Objects of ordinary life presented with a kind of ceremonial neatness. Boots set toe-to-toe. Radios looped with giggling. Compasses that went wild like insects trapped under glass. Pieces of wallet with a card still in it. The forest's grammar, in time, became a language we recognized. We stopped expecting answers and started cataloging signatures. We increased the verbatimness of the memos, too. The county requested copies of all incident reports, but we redacted to keep certain measures private. There are things in the files listed as extraction measures that the public sense of ethics would dislike, things the station keeps as a last resort. I have witnessed the implementation of such measures. They became necessary because the forest's tests do not answer to sentiment. I do not describe the measures in any procedural sense because that would be irresponsible, and because the description would do a violence to the people involved. You should understand only this. Some decisions are made on the basis of stopping further loss. They leave scars. Those scars became literal for me. At one stretch of my career, I had to invoke the measure twice within a single season. The memory of it lives in my hands more than my mouth. My reluctance to speak of it is not morality theater. It is respect for the fact that the actuals exist in a legal and moral whole. People who haven't been on the wall ask out of curiosity, "Did you ever, And you have to answer with silence or with the card. The station's interior life is mostly paperwork and coffee and the small comedy of logistical bureaucracy. There are moments when a recruit will arrive and try to fill the void with bravado, which is to say they will ask the wrong questions in the wrong tone. Is there an explanation, they'll press? Can someone prove what's happening? We'll hand them the card because it's both a mirror and a test. Some will pivot and do as they're told. Others will invent explanations that satisfy their desire for control and then go missing. Case, Dean Casey. He was a man who liked to sing at dawn and kept a can of black coffee on the dashboard of his pickup at all times.
He was careful and liked to document things in neat, legible handwriting.
He had been on patrol with me on a night where the compasses were eccentric, and the radios seemed to arc between our voices and something else. We found his truck later with the engine warm and the cup of coffee undisturbed, but Dean Casey was not there. In the back of the cab was a sheet of paper with a single line, "Don't chase," followed by a smear. The rest was gone. We keep Dean's file behind a tab labeled 01 Case Cluster B. The photograph shows his handwriting and the ragged edge where the rest of the page had been torn away. There is no forensic smell in the file image, only the ordinary sharpness of a man who had not meant to vanish. That image nestles on my desk the way a pebble keeps map for a path I take 100 times. At some point, I stopped counting bodies and began counting absences. You learn a different relationship to grief when the missing are more statistical than singular. The wall of photos grew. New black and white prints were added with gloved hands. Someone would place the small metal plate of a name with a date beneath, and the wall would accept the new vacancy as if accommodating a familiar species. Ritual filled the gap. When I was promoted to senior ranger, it was almost anticlimactic. They called me into the office and slid the promotion paperwork across my desk with the same soft, bureaucratic hum of the photocopier. The county clerk offered a handshake and said, "We're grateful for your service." The language is always spare at moments like that, because legal hands do not afford eloquence. I felt like a placeholder when it happened. I felt more like an inheritor of a set of obligations that had no clear moral ledger. Promotion meant training responsibility. More recruits came, more seasons cycled, and the card's words became a chorus. We read them aloud in the training room so often the phrase would lodge under your tongue. We ran scenario drills until the drills felt like theater, because theater at least rehearses what you might do. We practiced radio discipline. We taught the grabber tool for reach. We rehearsed counts. Dr. Ruby Patterson continued to come through. She would stand before the wall and look at a face and not look away the way civilians do. Once she cornered me after a shift and asked whether our policies, in practice, saved lives or merely postponed tragedies. She was clinical, curious, moral. What she wanted to know was whether the ledger added up. My answer, halting and not particularly heroic, was that the card and its expansions had reduced the number of total losses but had increased the number of costs carried by the living. She put in my file the suggestion that counseling be mandatory. The suggestion became a program that was underfunded and therefore underused because people will avoid speaking aloud what the card makes them bind themselves to. One of the recruits, Ava Graves, stayed past her probation. She was careful in a way that made me trust her faster than her age suggested. Her eyes were young but serious, the kind of face that made you think she had read too many books and not enough of the right kind of weather. She asked about the extraction in a classroom, gently, as if seeking to catalog it from memory rather than to rationalize it. "What happens to the—" she began, and then cut off. I told her, in the straightest way I could manage, that the card is a covenant to do whatever is necessary to preserve life, and that sometimes the necessary thing is an action you will regret for as long as you live. She nodded. I do not know whether nodding is acceptance or armor. The station tends to blur the two. More files accumulated. Some of them were small, almost laughably mundane when you consider the loss tied to them. A wallet with a driver's license photo folded strangely, a thermos found on a rock with steam rings around it, a child's mitten tied to a branch. Others were grotesque in an abstract sense. Post-mortem presentation inconsistent with natural causes, read one line in a coroner report, and then whatever followed had been redacted to a degree that offended the appetite for closure. We kept the redacted pages as part of the ledger so new hires would see that some knowledge was privileged and some was dangerous. The county legal counsel insisted that what we did not write in public had to be documented somewhere else. So the extraction file lived in a locked drawer with only senior officers having the key. I saw parts of it in my time.
What I read there taught me that some moral problems do not have satisfying solutions, and that sometimes you make choices you swore you'd never make because the alternative feels worse. There were nights when the ritual didn't save a man. Gardner's disappearance was a reminder of that. He had been meticulous by trade and methodical by temperament. We found him laid out like someone who'd been staged by a careless hand. Face presented in a way that made the grin look like something borrowed. The forensic language tried to be kind. The images were redacted when they found their way to the public record. I remember the training circle we held after Gardner's file was logged. We read the card in a low chorus and then paused, each of us considering what the balance sheet had cost. Every time a recruit asked, "Could this be explained scientifically?" I would answer with the card. That is both a dodge and a kind of ethics. The forest does not come with a guarantee. You obey because in the long run, the obedience tends to keep you in a position to help other living people. Curiosity kills in our ledger more often than not. I have watched that reality sculpt careers into the shape of resigned compliance. The red truck boy, so tattooed and so young, had been a case study in how arrogance becomes absence.
He cut himself off from the crew, thinking the night was a joke, and then we found a circle of prints and a tent flap swinging like an accusation. The county sent condolences, and the family sent a photograph of a teenager at a graduation with a grin that had, from all the files I read, never considered how close death might be to a moonless late-night walk. People write letters. Families write letters. Some demand explanations in language heavy with capital letters. Others write in shorthand guilt. One letter from a mother remains on my desk and reads, in its neat handwriting, "You promised to keep him safe." I keep that letter folded in a file and read it when the weight of the wall makes me thin. The promise is a complicated thing because the station's contract is not moral indemnity. It's a set of rules that sometimes have to choose among wrong things. The work hollowed me in parts. I collected scars like others collect tools. There were nights when I sat in the briefing room and thumbed the laminated card, thinking of faces on the wall and of the small, necessary cruelties we'd invoked to keep the rest of us breathing. I had to be stern with recruits who would not obey the rule about radios or who had to touch an anomalous object because their curiosity outweighed their training. We lost some that way. We saved others because they had the humility to follow the card. And then there was Casey, a different Casey this time, a seasonal who'd been on the late shift and had decided, against training, to answer a noise. He did not return. His boots were found lined along a log as if someone had set them down and walked away barefoot. His family asked for our full report. We gave them everything we could without giving them the measures. They accepted what we offered because there was no other partner to the loss. The station provides what it can, and grief takes the rest. The county occasionally audited our practices, and county auditors are a different species. They come with clipboards and slightly curled hair and a belief that laws will solve complicated and moral problems. They asked for a list of recent incidents, and we gave them folders. They left with a half-skeptical look, which is to say we failed to convert their skepticism into outrage. Their reports would come back with neutral recommendations. Consider updated radio frequencies. Consider more thorough youth outreach. They did not and could not account for the openness of the forest or the moral complexity of the extraction measures. We did what we could within the law and then did other things that saved lives and were, by necessity, unpublic. One summer left a memory that smells like tar and wet rope. Marcus, a short-timer with a soft laugh, went out for a late cigarette by a stand of birch and never came back. We found his cigarette lighter on a stump and his footprint pattern walking toward the water, and then nothing. The coroner's report returned in language that suggested the human form had been altered after death in ways that refused the vocabulary of normality. We filed it as post-mortem presentation altered. We closed the file.
The family called once and left a voicemail asking bluntly whether we were doing enough. I listened to the message 3 times before returning the call. I said as much as was safe. We had followed the card, we had logged and cataloged, we were investigating within the constraints afforded. They did not, I suspect, find comfort in the language. As senior ranger, I eventually became the person who read the card to new recruits, and expected myself to sound less like a man telling his own story and more like a civil servant delivering a speech. The paradox is that the more you say the exact words, the less you feel like a storyteller, and the more like a priest reciting a liturgy you no longer wholly believe. There were moments when I acted out of a deep spite against the forest's cruelty. Once, in a late winter that had the light of an old photograph, I found myself on an isolated trail with a recruit who panicked and moved toward an anomalous object. I pulled him back hard by the shoulder, and it felt like the last honest thing I'd done that week. The recruit's eyes filled, not with fear exactly, but with something like the dawning comprehension that obedience is sometimes the only margin between life and absence. We kept a ledger of every time a rule had seemed to make a difference. It was not comprehensive. It was a litany of small saves and large costs. There were nights we followed the card to the letter and came away with everyone breathing. There were nights when the card was followed and we still came home with a hole in the wall. You cannot legislate certainty out of the world. You can only try to make the odds tilt just enough. The climax of the station's calendar came one November when the county arranged a public hearing. People wanted to know why the park had so many disappearances. Editors wanted to vet the files. Families wanted apologies. We presented whatever redacted files were legal and put the rest behind locked doors. At the hearing, a woman stood up and said, "If you know what's happening and don't tell us, you're complicit." The county council answered in bureaucratic sympathy. I said nothing. The card was, by then, a physical thing in my pocket. Saying anything more would be to break a vow that had been given not by law, but by necessity. In quieter moments, I would thumb the laminated plastic and feel the little warmth from my pocket. It is a small thing that makes a big promise. I have made decisions that have left me hollow in ways that do not read well in a counselor's notebook. I have performed the private, terrible things the extraction demanded. I have given up parts of my moral clarity in exchange for the certainty that, for a while, people could keep breathing. I do not think the trade was free.
I think of the people on the walls sometimes as a ledger of my failures, and sometimes as markers of the cost the world exacted from us all. Eventually, as the station matured and I accrued years and scars, the county formalized the 3 additional directives into policy. The memo reads, in the stilted language of bureaucracy, "Station policy update, effective immediately. All personnel must carry and monitor radios. Anomalous items must be documented and bagged. Solo patrols during curfew are suspended except under express authorization." The policy made the card feel less like a superstition and more like law. It gave me, as a trainer, something sharper to point to when recruits tried to rationalize poor judgment. It also created a comfort that was dangerous. Language on paper is not the same as obedience in the field. I will finish this by giving you what I can, the files that shaped the station, not for the sake of spectacle, but to show what the card does in practice. These are their names and their voices as recorded in the ledger. They are not exhaustive. They are what I have been able to collect without giving up too much. File excerpt, radio transcript, Cedar Bend, 11:13. 11:06, Collins. Base, this is Collins. We're at Cedar Bend. Compass acting odd. 11:07, Romero. It spun. It static, then a high, brief noise. 11:08, Collins. Romero? Static. 11:09, Collins to base. Base, Romero's gone. Boots here, no sign. Requesting, static. Signal lost. Record filed under 4A. Redaction note. Portion of audio removed per internal protocol.
Incident report. Cabin, file 14H. Reported by civilian 911 call. Initial observation. Perfect ring of footprints surrounding cabin. Small depression center of ring. Child's drawing affixed to door. Radio signal lost at 0413. Action taken. Area secured. No human remains located. Photograph and sample collection. Recommended follow-up with coroner. Note: extraction measures considered. Details redacted to preserve privacy and procedural confidentiality. Coroner summary. Gardner. Redacted. Summary. Post-mortem presentation inconsistent with natural causes. Photographs redacted from public file. Tissue samples cataloged. Next of kin notified. Coroner's note. Internal. Presentation suggests deliberate post-mortem arrangement. No sign of predation. Further analysis ongoing. Internal memo. Station directive update. Unsigned, stamped. Effective immediately. Radios carried at all times. Missed pings trigger protocol. Anomalous objects to be secured, bagged, and tagged. Personnel to withdraw to safe range. Solo patrols during curfew hours prohibited without express authorization. Extraction measures permitted in extreme cases. And documented in locked file. Access restricted to senior officers. Family letter. Excerpt. I don't know what you can tell me that will fit the space between missing and returned. But please, tell me you tried. Response. We followed established protocol.
We are continuing to investigate. Further information beyond this is restricted as per county guidelines. Training log. Excerpt. Session Rule Reinforcement. Card recitation. Trainee question. Could we... Question redacted. Trainer response. Obedience is not the same as surrender. It is a tool. We practice to keep you breathing. Medical note. Dr. R. Patterson, confidential. History of trauma exposure. Recommend counseling and periodic review. Assess resilience. Discuss voluntary withdrawal if stress markers increase. The ledger is long. There are more files than I can recount without risking the privacy of family or the fragility of the procedures that, for better or worse, have saved people. For every file that looks like a failure, there are others that read like small triumphs. The night a pack of seasonals followed instruction exactly and returned to base without incident. The hunter who, when the compasses misbehaved, ran toward the lights and was escorted out safely. Those are the pages I keep for days when the wall feels like too much. When new recruits arrive, I place the laminated card in their hand and tell them the same 4 lines and the 3 directives we operate under now. I tell them, in as even a voice as I can muster, that obedience will sometimes feel like cowardice and other times like salvation. I tell them that curiosity is noble until it becomes a currency the forest spends on bodies. People ask whether the phenomena can be explained. I will say, as I have always said, not to our satisfaction. There are patterns, signatures, a vocabulary of misbehavior in instruments and ordinary objects that repeats. The card is our attempt to make those patterns survivable. It is not a cure, and it is not a theology. It is a practical answer to a series of hard, recurring problems. I also tell recruits this: you will live with what you must do. Some of us wear that like a wound, others hide it. The thing the card asks is obedience, not explanation. You will repeat the words until they become muscle. You will feel the cost. You will be asked to trade small freedoms for the chance of keeping others alive. That is not an easy contract. If you have been listening with the kind of attention that makes you feel the cold in your bones, go to the description where we've posted the public files. They are redacted where necessary, but they might give you a sense of how this station manages the unmanageable. It's the only early CTA I offered. Information is available if you want to see what bureaucratic grief looks like in paper. I say the card again because the ritual of repetition is the last thing that binds a group together in this work. I say the words so that you might understand the mechanics of habit that keep us breathing. 1. If the compass spins, run to the station by the fastest route. 2. Count the boots at every stop. If the count changes, sound the alarm and do not search alone. 3. If you hear children laughing in the trees, follow the extraction protocol without delay. 4. Between 01 and 04, maintain position. Do not move unless ordered. 5. Radios must be carried and monitored at all times. One missed ping is cause for protocol. 6. Do not touch or disturb anomalous objects. Report, bag, and tag, then withdraw. 7. No solo patrols during curfew hours unless under express command. Those lines live in my hand. Sometimes, late at night, when the heater hums and the coffee goes cold in a half-full thermos, I run my thumb across the card's smooth corner and count how many faces the wall has gathered since I first slid into this station. The math does not absolve me. The ritual does not make every decision moral. It makes survival possible in a way that was not. You asked, by reading this far, I assume, for the truth. I can give you the ledger. I can show you transcripts and memos and photographs that are legal to show. I cannot, in good conscience, offer procedural descriptions of measures that risk harm if imitated. I will tell you, though, what is true in my bones. Curiosity is beautiful in many contexts, but deadly in this one. Obedience, in these woods, is a kind of mercy. There are moments when the veneer of duty cracks, and you ask yourself whether what you have bound yourself to is a righteous compact or a slow erosion of the self. I cannot answer that for anyone but myself. I can only testify to the fact that the card has kept more people breathing than we might have done otherwise. I can tell you that the wall of photos will keep gaining new squares no matter what we do. I can tell you that the forest is not interested in being explained. It is interested in testing. I conclude this record as I always do, with the small, tired ritual of repeating the card and placing it back in the drawer where recruits may reach for it and senior officers may tuck it back into their pockets. It is a small thing to carry. It is a large thing to be asked to obey. If you want more of the station files, photographs, redacted transcripts, public incident reports, they are linked in the description. If you want to hear more witness accounts from other rangers, subscribe for future uploads of station files and long-form testimony. We maintain the records not because they give answers, but because keeping them is how we remember the cost. One last thing, quietly. If any part of this touches something tender inside you, if the mention of self-harm, the description of traumatic injury, or the moral weight of duty has unsettled you, please consider the trigger warning at the top of this recording. The depictions here are dramatized and fictionalized for the purposes of this narrative, and if you or someone you know is struggling, reach out. Resources are listed in the description. I fold the card back into my wallet, the same way I have done 1,000 times. The wall waits behind me like a night that never fully leaves.
The footprints, the radios, the missing boots. These are our language now. We obey, and we keep breathing. And sometimes, in the quiet interval between one report and the next, we feel like the phrase on the card has saved us. Sometimes it hasn't. We learn to live with both facts. This is the record from a ranger who has lived by the card, who has added his own tally to the wall, and who keeps teaching, because what else do we do with each other but try to give the living a chance? I lock the drawer. I put the file back. I check the radio once more. Then I close the station door and step out into the weather. Compass level, pockets full of rules, and a hand in my coat on the small laminated square that will not let me forget.